All right, so we've got a little bit of a new format for the show here, but some of the stuff they've been discussing on the network is just too rich for commentary, and their ability to slip ideological talking points in under the guise of meta commentary is something that I think has been noticed more and more, judging by the stuff in the comment sections. And so today we're going to discuss Bri making this extremely protracted ideological argument. So we're going to skip most of the protracted ideological argument. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Bri's radars. If you see one that's over 12 minutes, you know that a good 60% of it is going to be Bri doing a monologue in which she sets up a construct with, she might dip her toes into objective reality one or two times during that 10 to 12 minutes. But for the most part, those touches into reality are things that she's going to use to anchor an ideological argument that's based on a narrative which is far divorced from anything that respects objective reality. Obviously, she's talented at this, and so that's why we're breaking down one of the more popular propagandists working today in real time here. But I'd like to skip most of the ideological construct buildup that comprises Bri's long-form radar videos. It is important to have a definition of what qualifies as a landlord that should be criticized in this diatribe of hers. In this clip here, you'll see what she says about landlords, and what's important to note about the earlier couple minutes, if anything had to be mentioned, is that she's setting up this construct where she's really blurring the lines between corporate landlords of the type that were criticized for putting in large cash offers over the asking price during 2021 and buying a lot of apartment units and things like that. She's conflating those with people who are the focus of this New York Times article. It's not the one that's on the screen now, but this New York Times article discusses a couple guys who own, thousands of apartment units, which is a lot. And these guys obviously set up, some sort of LLC or corporation or whatever to have some sort of shield of liability between themselves and these companies. And so, to say that they're like corporations is a little bit, it's a protracted argument that you expect to see from someone like Bri, an unhinged ideologue who will stop at nothing to subvert the conversation and push her ideological agenda. And then, her rhetoric, though, is where it gets a little bit more interesting. And, here, in this clip I'm about to play, like I just said, the New York Times article kind of like stops out at talking about landlords, like I said, who are individuals themselves, who do own a large amount of apartment units on the scale of thousands. Bri takes it from 10 to 1,000 within a couple seconds. So, you go from someone who owns thousands of units to someone who owns tens of units, in the reverse order. And just imagine the amount of people that you're encompassing when you widen the group that much. Let's check out what she's got to say here.
And many leftists simply pressed on this simple point. Landlords, at least those who own 10, 20, 1,000 properties, serve a parasitic...
Rather quickly, I'm going to replay it because she gets into some even crazier shit there that I forgot about. But rather quickly, you see how quickly that happened. Landlords who own 10, 20, 1,000, as if there's not like huge swaths of, the landlord population that would fall into the category between 20 and 1,000. It's pretty unbelievable. That's the difference between, one medium-sized or one large apartment building with 10 or 20 units and a whole fleet of apartment buildings with, 50 units each or something like that. So huge difference, huge orders of magnitude of difference. And this is what propagandists do, is they use nebulous dialogue and unclear, vague phrasing to project a hyper reality that is untrue, but appears to have a basis in truth. So I'm going to let it play this time because I took the gun there.
At least those who own 10, 20, 1,000 properties serve a parasitic function in society. They squat on properties that are in low supply, preventing others from becoming homeowners and drawing passive income from the wealth of others while doing little to improve the property or provide any labor value at all.
All right, so the idea that landlords don't provide any labor value is a little bit interesting. Typically, there's a super in a larger building, or the landlord will have a guy at least that he calls to take care of maintenance issues. Obviously, it's not always the most efficient process. I just dealt with a rather frustrating one before moving. But, this blurry rhetoric is anything but useful. And she even goes as far as to say that they serve a parasitic function. And so, she's very careful. Bri is careful not to say that they are parasites, but she will say that they serve a parasitic function. And so, they're not termites, but they serve the function of termites, is something that Louis Farrakhan might say if he was asked to clarify some of his more infamous word choices. And so you can see the issue there when she goes from 10 to 20 to 1,000 units and then says that they serve a parasitic function. She's trying to flatten the range of human existence among landlords. At about this point, she brings up this tweet and it just hammers in the point that, this is some guy who has, I don't know how many followers. I looked earlier, this tweet had like 1 like, and it wasn't from Bri, but landlords aren't bad. If you own a few houses and rent them out, happy for you. I don't dislike you. But no one should own more than 10 homes. Obviously, I skipped a little bit there, especially not blood-sucking multinationals. So the small toe dip into reality that I mentioned earlier is that there were some predatory things going on where huge companies were coming in and putting in crazy cash offers on homes, putting them out of reach of people who were, in earnest trying to become homeowners. And by having that anchor in objective reality, they think they can then take the leap. I'm talking about ideologues here. They think they can take the leap to saying that no one should own more than 10 homes. And so there's this arbitrary line that's drawn, and you could see how quickly something like that could go downhill, especially when you look in the past at some of the appropriation of property or expropriation or whatever that has taken place when some governments have taken power.
If you own a few houses and rent them out, I'm happy for you and I don't dislike you, observed one person. But no one, especially not blood-sucking multinationals, should own more than 10 homes. I have never been given even the slightest reason to believe otherwise. Well, the New York Times is trying to give you a reason. Across America, homes sit empty as profiteers choose to purpose them for profit, rather than purposing them for the public need. And Americans are suffering from it. But the New York Times sees it differently. Won't somebody think about the landlords?
She might tell you otherwise, but the implication there is indeed that anybody who owns a house that sits vacant should have that used for the public need. These people, their rhetoric implies, they'll never say it, and you're seeing that they'll never say it demonstrated, or you're seeing that they won't follow through with it in praxis, demonstrated with the Martha's Vineyard situation and, other places that were supposedly sanctuary cities that obviously, once they're confronted with the reality of that, don't want to follow through with their rhetoric. What they don't say, the quiet part that is not said out loud, is that in order to, forcefully fill these homes with people who are currently houseless or whatever they would like to, call them, you have to apply some amount of coercion, which ultimately winds up leading to possibility of force. These are the things that are the undertone of the argument that she doesn't want to discuss or acknowledge. I'm going to skip ahead a couple minutes. We're going to have this tweet from this gentleman that I think they had on the show the other day, actually. Could be wrong, but he's some, journalist or whatever from Italy. And apparently he's talking about Meloni. That's the hot Italian lady who was voted to be prime minister the other day. She's doing away with some subsidy for the poor, 500 euros on average for those without a job. So, there's no real context to this, and even Brianna just mentions it. And here, what she's doing is casting it as the type of typical right-wing, move. Whatever. It's interesting. She brings this up for about 2 seconds. Brings it up for about 2 seconds. And doesn't really delve into any of the details of it before pivoting here, and this is why I'm bringing it up, to turning this into a criticism of liberalism. And so a propagandist like Brianna is very careful with her phrasing, and when she says something like liberal as opposed to progressive, it's intentional. So here, let's take a look at this, and she's going to describe what she frames as the liberal version of doing away with a 500 euro subsidy.
There's a liberal version of this too. Identity politics are often cynically weaponized to make people turn against workers. They claim that unions hold no promise for black and brown workers, for example, ignoring the significant role marginalized racial groups have always had in the labor movement, and the fact that black workers today are 17% more likely to be unionized. Imagine the mental gymnastics needed to see through America's most prominent union organizer right now, Chris Smalls.
All right, so this is a little bit of a real-time propaganda test. Did you see what she did there? So she describes this as the liberal version. The liberal version of this. Weaponizing identity politics. Obviously, I do critique weaponizing identity politics. I critique identity politics in general, even if not weaponized. I think the only place they lead is a cynical weaponization. But what's important to understand here is that, and what I'm going to point out about Bri heightening her own contradictions in real time, and we're going to get into the relevant philosophical definitions of contradictions in a Marxist framework later in the video. And that's the main concept that we're really trying to break down here, is Bri's propagandistic insertion of 100% without a doubt Marxist viewpoints into her seemingly mainstream-ish word salad political meta commentary. So this is Bri's criticism of weaponized identity politics, and this is what was the real-time test here. We're going to get back to where this tweet comes up. All right. So this tweet, if you saw what she did with the tweet, then maybe you know what she did already, but it's hard to confirm in real time. They keep this up very briefly. This is a tweet. This is from a gentleman named Marxicology. Okay, so it's just worth noting maybe. But anyways, Marxicology here says that black people have a higher union membership than any other racial group. Okay, that's the first premise that he advances here. It'll disappear in a second. I didn't mean to cover it up. All right. Black people have a higher union membership than any other racial group. Now, the next sentence is that union wages for black workers are 17% higher than their non-union counterparts. Okay? So, if you're just reading these quickly, because like Brianna, you're trying to make an ideologically motivated argument, this might be confusing for you somehow. And this really proves the bad faith nature of most of her protracted arguments here. Okay, so this first sentence is a comparison of black people versus other racial groups. All right? Black people have a higher union membership than any other racial group. Sure. Let's take that for a fact. The next sentence is exclusively about black workers. Union wages for black workers are 17% higher than their non-union counterparts. Okay? So this is comparing union wages of black union members to their non-union counterparts, who are black people who are not in unions. And the wages are 17% higher for the black workers. So again, we'll take that as a total fact. It's not important whether or not it's true, for pointing out Bri's bad faith motivations. So let's watch it back in real time now. And what you'll hear is that Bri says that black people are 17% more likely to be in a union. So what she did is she read that black people have higher union membership than any other racial group, and then because she looked down a line without reading and saw 17, she assumed that it was related to the predicate of the first sentence here, or even the premise of it. And it's not. It's a separate fact that's exclusively about black workers and a comparison between union members and non-union members. So what we'll do here is we'll rewind it a couple seconds, and we're going to hear about the weaponization of identity politics, and Bri is going to explain to us why the weaponization of identity politics is bad by presenting misinformation, dangerous, deadly misinformation.
There's a liberal version of this too. Identity politics are often cynically weaponized to make people turn against workers. They claim that unions hold no promise for black and brown workers, for example, ignoring the significant role marginalized racial groups have always had in the labor movement, and the fact that black workers today are 17% more likely to be unionized. Imagine the mental gymnastics needed to see through America's most prominent union organizer right now, Chris Smalls of the Amazon Union Drive, to lodge a complaint about unions, quote, co-opting the black power fist. Give me a break.
So imagine the mental gymnastics, Bri. Imagine the mental gymnastics it takes. Oh, imagine the fucking mental gymnastics, Bri, that it takes to look at that tweet and misrepresent the data within it to talk about membership being 17% higher when that was about a comparison of wages between black union members and non-union members. Unbelievable, Bri. Unbelievable. And this is the value of real-time propaganda breakdown, is unless you watch a good amount of media with a skeptical eye, a lot of people are just soaking it in, which is fine, but it's hard to catch the things that ideologues do like this. And so if you're missing shit from just some typical news anchor who's not necessarily a political operative, it's not necessarily the biggest deal because they're not being pernicious with their bullshit filler wording. Bri is. Bri makes ideological assertions, and then between those ideological assertions, there's brief anchors into objective reality. And then there are, word salads that are meant to lull the listener into a place of less skepticism just in time for the next ideological assertion. Robbie is going to tepidly suggest that we not stigmatize groups. Seems like a rather tepid suggestion. But what you'll see is that Bri has an issue and wants to break down the concept of stigmatizing groups. And she wants to make the case for stigmatizing groups that are her ideological opponents. It's not that shocking if you're someone who has recognized the prevalence of ideologues in modern day discourse. But if you aren't someone who has spotted this as a pattern of pernicious behavior and thought it might have been coincidence or poor phrasing, then let's make this the last time, because let's listen to what she has to say here. Let's listen to Robbie's tepid response.
Yeah, look, obviously people, workers are free to advocate for themselves and to organize and to get more of what they deserve and deserve more than they're getting. I don't have any issue with that. We can find common cause on that. I don't know that we need to stigmatize landlords, but it's,
What is the resistance? Let's get into that a little bit. What is the resistance to stigmatizing landlords?
What is the resistance to stigmatizing landlords? So Robbie gently suggests that we don't stigmatize landlords. And Kim's response to that is to deconstruct why we don't stigmatize landlords. I think I said Kim. I might have said Kim a lot of times and I meant Bri. I don't know why. That'd be very weird, but we're not going to go back and correct it. Anyways, I know her name's Bri, but I just want to call her Kim. Sometimes I listen to Eminem's songs and think of her, so maybe that's why I'm getting confused. But she wants to discuss why not stigmatize landlords. Let's fucking run it back, just in case you didn't catch it in real time.
Not that we need
You'd love to see it.
Stigmatize landlords, but it's
What is the resistance? Let's get into that a little bit. What is the resistance to stigmatizing landlords? Because in other contexts, I mean, I'm not saying this is what you do or what happens on this show, but there certainly does seem to me to be an effort to stigmatize various other groups in this country.
Woo! So, just a criticism of the shill in general. So much time spent correcting the record about their own bullshit. Robbie just advocated against stigmatizing groups, so you don't need to clarify that you're not talking about Robbie when you mention, not stigmatizing groups. It's fucking ridiculous. So much time spent, maybe 5% of each segment, or the segments in general, on average, is them correcting the record about some bullshit they tweeted and like the reaction from some dude with 2 followers. No one gives a fuck about that. Let's present a more concise and straightforward and honest analysis of the news. She's going to talk about how other groups are stigmatized. And so again, what we're going to get into here, and what she just tried to differentiate and make sure that everyone knows that Robbie and this show, we don't do this, is that there's an effort to stigmatize other groups. And so she wants to explain why, or just explore the idea of why, we don't stigmatize landlords, but we do stigmatize the identity group, the list of bullet point identity groups, the progressive hierarchy, the progressive stack, the oppression Olympic category list that we're about to see her run down. So remember, moments ago, Bri was criticizing the weaponization of identity politics, and within seconds, within seconds, we're going to see her delve into a list of identity categories that she's bringing out while trying to make her argument. And this is the second time. Obviously, we just discussed the tweet that she misrepresented, about black union members and non-members.
Trans people, the parents of trans people. Wait a minute. Immigrants, woke folks, college kids, Black Lives Matter people. And that's not to say you have to agree with everybody there or their politics. But the amount of energy that goes toward vilifying, some girl in high school who wants to play on our volleyball team, trans girl, versus landlords who are really doing this thing.
There's quite a bit there. So she runs down this list of identity groups, and she's running on autopilot so much that by the end of it, she's listing college students as a marginalized group. It's just insane to be so thin on marginalized groups that 5 groups in, you're fucking mentioning college students as a marginalized group. She's so used to it, though. She's on such NPC level autopilot that it's just over the top. And so by the end of this, she gets into a whole nother area where she makes an ideological assertion under the guise of, casual conversation. And we're going to run it back in a second. But did you see what she did again? This is kind of good testing in real time. She talks about a girl who there's stigmatization of a girl who just wants to play volleyball. By the way, it's a trans girl. And so, whatever you might think of those issues, just listen to the dishonest way that she plays this. It's unbelievable. She herself can't stop from making the ideological ahead of head. She's on such autopilot that she can't pump the brakes enough to slow down and not smuggle in a huge ideological assertion. In this case, what's revealed is the fact that she wants to refer to a trans girl as a girl in order to let that chick just play like high school volleyball or whatever. So let's listen again to what she said. We'll rewind it a sufficient amount. We'll go back far enough to where she's going to mention the list of identity groups. All right, so we got this part queued back up, and again, we're gonna, now that we discussed it, we'll listen again to Bri running through her list of identity groups. The thing that she just moments ago said was cynically weaponized. We're gonna see her bring that up, and then she'll get into this hypothetical case of a girl who just wants to play volleyball. By the way, did I mention it's a trans girl? So she's in such autopilot that she doesn't even mention that the real controversy is not about whether or not one person is or isn't able to compete. The controversy that comes up is about the reaction to that. And so you wind up in a situation where people like Bri, who are in influential positions with media platforms, wind up just using the term girl when they're referring to a trans girl. You know, afterwards, she makes the distinction because she knows what she's saying makes no sense if she doesn't. And that's what the real controversy is about. The controversy is about the ideological assertion that there's no difference between a girl and a trans girl, or a woman and a trans woman, whatever you want to frame it as, inside or outside the paradigm of high school or competitive sports. That's the controversy. The controversy is your ideological assertion, Bri. It's your ideological assertion. And don't get confused about that, people. That's the important thing to keep in mind. It's their ideological assertion that creates the controversy. And we're going to get into why that's a deliberate ideological goal and tactic.
Because in other contexts, I mean, I'm not saying this is what you do or what happens on this show, but there certainly does seem to me to be an effort to stigmatize various other groups in this country. Trans people, the parents of trans people. Wait a minute. Immigrants, woke folks, college kids, Black Lives Matter people. And that's not to say you have to agree with everybody there or their politics, but the amount of energy that goes toward vilifying, some girl in high school who wants to play on our volleyball team, trans girl, versus landlords who are really doing this thing where the corporations buying up properties, squatting on them, not giving them to people who are...
Okay, so you just saw the conflation there, and I let it play a little bit longer than last time because you see conflation in real time. So earlier in the video, the first clips we played established that by landlords, she's not talking about someone who owns a crazy amount of apartments or units necessarily. I understand it sounds like a lot for someone to own 10 homes, and that person would be probably pretty successful if they did. But the idea that by owning 10 homes arbitrarily, you're some ultra predatory person serving a terrorist function in society is a little bit outlandish. And I just think it's important that people understand the ideological assertions that are being smuggled into what sounds like relatively straightforward rhetoric.
Homeless, don't alternative to live, are facing mass evictions in the context of this crisis. If anyone is going to be vilified, why does it seem like there's not really an objection to vilifying Group A? I'm not saying that you want to vilify Group A, but there's no real public objection to vilifying Group A. But if you come for landlords, the New York Times...
Marketing of the record. Did we not just hear Robbie say he's the one who's not trying to stigmatize people? 2 times now. She's preemptively absolved Robbie and the show of wanting to vilify or stigmatize people. It's a little bit ridiculous. Too much time spent correcting the record.
And jump in and defend you.
Well, I'm not going to defend the New York Times coverage choices because they're abominable. Let's try not to stigmatize anyone. Let's try to find sensible policies that work for everyone. I'm in an accommodating mood today, Brianna.
It's an interesting question because I do think a lot of people do react kind of instinctively and say, well, I don't want to say anything bad about anybody, or I know someone who's a landlord, and certainly this is not about smaller landlords, someone who owns 1 or 2 properties, because unfortunately we live in a...
It's not about someone who owns 1 or 2 properties. But once you get to the arbitrary number of 10 or whatever too many sounds like, I'm sure in a couple of years they'll be talking about 5. It becomes a huge issue. Once you have 10, then you have 20, then you have 1,000. And there's no need to make a distinction between the two of you. And as Bri just said, landlords, corporations, she said that within 2 seconds she went from landlords to corporations. And these are important distinctions. But in real time, I don't know if the average listener necessarily is always paying attention enough to just note the ideological assertions that are smuggled in. Because what happens is, the 10 minutes of unquestioned diatribe, she anchors much of that briefly in objective reality. And what you're about to see, actually, let me see here. What you're going to see as we speed up a little bit here, skip ahead a few seconds, is you're going to see her go full mask off in this moment here. She's going to go full mask off. And so Bri, ideologically, is a Marxist-Leninist revolutionary. She talks all the time about global working class solidarity. And all of this shit is just kind of like euphemistic dancing around, acknowledging the fact that she would love to see a violent revolution. And we're going to get, right now, this is the important meat of the video. What we're going to do is make a connection between her ideological assertions and more explicit or vulgar Marxist rhetoric, including from Mao. So let's listen to what she has to say here. We're at the 1354 mark, and we're going to have Bri talking about some bullshit as usual, but let's listen to what she has to say.
Some people would say, a leftist kind of, dare I say, Marxist analysis, would say that people cannot...
Dare you say Marxist? Because no one knew. Bri. Like I said earlier, Bri, Kim, we're going to use them interchangeably, but I mean, Jesus, it's just funny. Dare I say Marxist, a leftist, dare I say Marxist analysis, that's all you do.
Dare I say Marxist analysis, would say that people cannot be rich without others being poor. And there is a relationship between an enormous aggregation of wealth at the top that has happened, especially during the pandemic, and the poverty that people have been thrown in. And that these things are...
So, like I just said, much of the time Bri is disguising pretty explicitly ideological Marxist-Leninist viewpoints within seemingly more mainstream phrasing. And so we'll run it back a second here, and we'll listen again to what she has to say.
Some people would say, a leftist kind of, dare I say, Marxist analysis, would say that people cannot be rich without others being poor. And there is a...
People cannot be rich without others being poor. So what Bri's getting at here is what's called the heightening of contradictions. She's talking about contradictions. Ultimately, the ideological goal in praxis is to heighten the contradictions. Okay? And so Marx talked about how a capitalist society, or any society really, but a capitalist society has inherent contradictions. What did Bri just say? In order for someone to be rich, someone else must be poor. She's talking about two ends of a bell curve of normal distribution. She's talking about that contradiction about a capitalist society where, on paper, by definition, a capitalist society is where one is able to leverage capital into more capital, able to increase net worth and value through the strategic trading of resources or labor. Obviously, Marxists have an ideology that's almost entirely comprised of, a near spiritual outlook on the concept of labor itself. And so the heightening of contradictions, right? In order for someone to be rich, someone must be poor. See what she says after that.
There is a relationship between an enormous aggregation of wealth at the top that has happened, especially during the pandemic, and the poverty that people have been thrown in. And that these.
So what she does here is just further, she kind of ingrains more recency into the description of a contradiction. So she's talking about the income disparity that's been heightened. Income disparity is a contradiction. Okay, that's the name of the contradiction for there being some rich people and some poor people, is income disparity. So income disparity is heightened. It's during the pandemic. We're starting to tug at emotional heartstrings. Let's see where she goes from there.
Separate. And so therefore you absolutely do have to have some angst. You do have.
That's the important piece right there. See, things due to the disparity and due to the contradiction, there are separate sides of the dialectic, okay? And you have to have some angst. So let's think about that. Bri, her ideological goal, right? The ideological goal in Bri highlighting this contradiction is to instill angst into the working class, which is what she considers her argument. So it's important to keep that in mind. That's the main takeaway from this portion. And it's important to just keep the portions somewhat compartmentalized, because when you're dealing with a propagandist, you're weaving in and out of touches upon objective reality and, full bore dives into ideological reality rapidly. So that's Bri highlighting the contradictions, okay? And she, again, without getting into the terminology exactly, because she's trying to remain at least somewhat covert, she's discussing the heightening of contradictions in society. All right, so now we're going to take a look at Mao discussing contradictions, okay? So this is from On Contradiction, 1937, written by Mao. This is a translation of it. And here is, just something that I think highlights the thesis of the paper. And again, this is written about by Marx. As I mentioned earlier, Marx talks about the contradictions within a capitalist society explicitly in the Communist Manifesto. Lenin talked about the heightening of contradictions as well. He's actually quoted up here, Lenin said, by Mao, but I wanted to try to keep it concise, as you can tell by now I'm bad at doing, and discuss this portion, which again I think conveys the thesis of Mao's ideas, Mao's mission of heightening the contradictions. It's the changes in society are due chiefly to the development of the internal contradictions in society. That is, the contradiction between the productive forces and the relations of production. The contradiction between classes and the contradiction between the old and the new. It's the development of these contradictions that pushes society forward and gives the impetus for the suppression of the old society by the new. So that's what Mao had to say. So we've heard it from Bri, who's a media influencer. We've heard it from Mao, who was a real influencer, so to speak. He heightened contradictions to the point of, 50 million deaths or so. And now we're going to hear it from this chick. She's being interviewed by Vladimir Jaffe or whatever, who is a former Soviet citizen, and he's interviewing her. The title of his video is "I'm okay with spilling innocent blood to achieve revolutionary goals," says Middle Eastern commie. Let's listen to what she has to say. I've got it queued up here. We've discussed the contradictions, the heightened contradictions, and we're going to listen to what she has to say.
So you want to shed blood because it's a revolution for your ideas. Is that right?
In many
You're okay with
contexts, it's possible. Currently, in the U.S. context, it's not.
No, but there's a
So In many contexts, it's possible to shed blood for your ideology. Currently, in the United States context, it's not possible. That's what that has to say. And the reason, as far as she's concerned, that it's not possible to shed blood is essentially that there's not enough angst. This is the implied reason. There's not enough angst that's based upon the heightened contradictions of society to inspire violence. Not yet. Not yet. She's in favor of it when it does happen, and when we get to that point. And so now she's going to more explicitly get into the contradiction and the heightening thereof.
I mean, I understand. So, it's a theory you're okay with, like spilling, well, basically innocent blood to achieve your goals, whatever the goals might be.
Yeah, for example, I'm from the Middle East, so in the Middle East there's the threat of ISIS, and so my people were ready to fight against ISIS because we're ready to die fighting ISIS. So that's an example of.
But it's a little bit different because ISIS is the aggressor. ISIS is the one who wants to eliminate, well, basically,
the people, yeah.
I mean, anyone who disagrees with them.
Right.
But here, we have a society where nobody bothers you, nobody's trying to kill you, nobody's to eliminate you. It's coming from you who thinks that the system...
So she makes this obtuse comparison to ISIS in the Middle East, and Vladimir, rather poignantly, asserts objective reality and that ISIS are aggressors. So exercising violent resistance towards them is a little bit different than violence inspired by the angst that's born of your political ideology. She's going to clarify in a second. I kind of paused it in the middle. I'll go back 5 seconds. So what Vladimir's describing, saying kill you, one's trying to bother you, he's describing minimal contradictions. Obviously, it's not as if this is the whole point of this, is that the ideology does occasionally delve into objective reality, and it anchors itself on those brief moments. There are contradictions in society. It is true that some people are rich and some people are poor. It's not necessarily the goal of a capitalist system, but it is the reality of a normal distribution in terms of income, and IQ, any statistic, So she's going to clarify that no one here at this demonstration, which was going on somewhere in New York, no one wants to be violent yet. And then she's going to get into her explanation of the heightened contradictions.
To eliminate you. It's coming from you who thinks that the system... But you just said revolution. I mean, revolution and bloodshed, they go hand in hand, and you're okay with it.
I'm saying a revolution is coming in the long term. I do think that
but it doesn't matter.
Fundamentally, a change of system will happen.
But why? Why do you think the change of system is necessary? What's wrong with the current system? Don't you live a comfortable life? Especially coming from Middle East, to compare the systems?
So the Marxist analysis is that there's currently a lot of different small contradictions in society. And these contradictions become more severe or less severe. So that's why it varies on which location, which country, but even within a country there's different locations where the contradictions are different.
Of course, yes.
So a revolution is the change that will happen once contradictions become so severe that it's no longer sustainable. So that's the only situation where a revolution will happen.
I see.
And that's the guy was saying was that currently it's not in this stage.
I see. So, but the thing with Marxism, and actually we had to study Marxism because...
All right, so obviously that's pretty entertaining, and you could listen to that all day, but that's a very concise explanation of the heightening of contradictions from someone who is attending a socialist, Marxist, function of some kind. And so you've seen different levels of this, right? We're looking at someone on the ground, engaged in activism. We're looking at a media influencer, and we're looking at Mao, someone who was literally the leader of perhaps at least in terms of volume and number of people, the grandest communist revolution that's ever taken place. So, just to polish this off, we're going to get into one more brief example of Bri not weaponizing identity politics. Let's see what she has to say here.
People who are poor actually are seeing declines.
They're not seeing declines.
For the first time in American history, life expectancy, including for white people in America, has gone down. You have disease of despair devastating parts of this country, particularly in the Midwest. You have
life expectancy, including for white people, is going down. As if we don't automatically include all racial groups in people when you say that. I mean, it's just, this is the level of shit that you get from these ideological assholes.